Hey everybody, this is Miss Huval. The video I'm making today is for English 2 Honors, and it's on the subject of night, Chapter 5 of Night, in fact. So, you need to be sure that you've read the whole book from Chapter 1 to Chapter 6, stopping at the beginning of Chapter 6 before you watch this video. This video is not a summary of Chapter 5, and so you need to be sure that you've read it so that it makes sense to you. Chapter 5 is from page 66 to page 84 in your night book. If you are looking at a PDF online, it's the same. The pagination should be exactly the same. All right, so as we talk about night today, we're looking at the three main themes that we've been looking at throughout the development of the book. That struggle to maintain faith in God during severe trauma, the importance of maintaining human dignity in the face of inhumanity and degrading circumstances, and the strength of family bonds, the reliance of people on family to survive. Okay? We're also looking at the motifs of fire and night, which recur in the novel and help to support theme. All right, so the setting of Chapter 5 is still in Buna. So they're working in Buna. They've been separated, Elie and his dad. They work in two different commandos, but they're still both there in Buna. And by the end of Chapter 5, it is wintertime, the dead of January. Snowy, very cold, and they are leaving Buna for a different concentration camp because the Red Army is very close by, and so they're moving closer toward Germany. Remember, they're in Poland now. They're in Auschwitz, which is in Poland. Okay, so that's the setting in time and in place. And as we open on Chapter 4, we've got the same sort of style of storytelling. It's not a diary format, like on Monday these things happened, dates, chronologically ordered. It's somewhat chronological, but he doesn't tell you everything that happened. He chooses these stories that kind of really get to the root of what he was experiencing. And in Chapter 5, he really starts with this theme of struggle to maintain faith in God during severe trauma. Now, we know it was after the first night that Elie tells us that he lost his faith in God. And we know that the book was written over 10 years after he was liberated from the concentration camps. And still, at that time, he felt that way. That God shouldn't or couldn't have stood by and allowed these things to happen, that surely he must not be real. But in this chapter, Chapter 5, he really sort of fleshes out that belief. He really sort of gets down deep into it. So let's talk about it real quick. We open on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And specifically, they've got on the Apple Platts 10,000 gathered to pray. The capos, the blockal tests, everyone is out there in order to say the prayers for Rosh Hashanah. There's extra thick soup that day in celebration of this holy day, and no one eats their soup, hungry as they are, until after the prayers have been said. Everyone is able to sing them. Elie can't. He expresses here his anger at God. And the Jewish New Year is an occasion, I guess, where there's a lot of reflection over what you've done to offend God and asking his forgiveness and praising him. And Elie kind of turns that around on God. He said, today I'm not going to think about what I've done that's offended you. I'm accusing you of the things you've done to us, the Jewish people. He mentions the 6 crematoria in that compound, which go day and night, holy days, non-holy days, weekends, constantly. Ultimately, he says that he believes that man is more powerful than God. And that's huge. He says, Rosh Hashanah used to dominate my life. He used to be able to reflect on the year and believe that his prayers and his atonement for his sins could save the world. And at this stage of the game, you've got him completely angry with God and completely unable to say the prayers and mean them, so he doesn't say them at all. And he feels terrible about that. The next big event in the development of the religious theme is Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and typically on that day, observant Jews would fast. So they have this big discussion. Are we going to fast? We're already so close to death's door. Are we going to fast? His father forbids it. He doesn't fast. He eats this measly crust of bread that he has. And he makes the comment there on page 69. He said, I felt a great void opening inside of me. So where that faith had been, there is a void, nothingness. And that's very sad too. All right, the last example we have of people losing their faith applies to not only Elie, but to people who were extremely strong in their faith also when they arrived at the camp. Akiba Drumer, if you remember, he's the one who sings the Hasidic melodies and is very faithful, as well as the rabbi from Poland. Both believe, they lose their faith. They believe that God is not in control, and they cannot reconcile what they're experiencing with what they've been taught and what they used to believe about God. Akiba Drumer is an especially sad case. If you remember, he's the one who loses his faith, allows himself to be chosen in the selection, and then says, please say Kaddish for me, even though, I'm not believing anymore. Please say Kaddish for me 3 days after, in 3 days. And of course, we know what happens there. They forget to say it because they have 3 particularly harsh days. And as a result, that you can just see that sort of loss of faith in the community in general. So that theme features very prominently in this chapter, and it's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking to see what's happening to the Jews as this wears on. And we see a lot of people in this chapter who've been there a long time. You remember there was one Blockle test who had been there since 1933. And at this stage of the game, it's 1944. He had survived that long in the concentration camp. So you just can't imagine what that would do to you day in and day out, struggling to survive in that way. So that's our theme of religion. Now we've also got the real important theme here that's really our primary one that we've been following so far. That human dignity, that trying to cling to the things that make us human, our kind treatment of one another, trying to impose some sort of order. Faith factors into that too. Following some sort of system that makes you feel that chaos is not reigning, that makes you feel like you're observing your morals and you are maintaining your human dignity. Even if it can't really be in the way that you're accustomed to doing it, still, it's there. All right? And we've got several things which really, really cause that to come under attack in this chapter. And I guess the most perfect example would be selection itself, where Dr. Mengele, other SS officers, have you stripped down naked, have you run by them, and they make the decision whether you will live or die based on that. And so that happens actually on the Jewish New Year. He says that was our present. And he and his dad have been separated into different groups, work groups. And so they go through selection separately. And of course, at first, they both believe that they've passed. And he makes the comment that everyone has to go through selection. Not only him and his dad and the other working inmates, but all the capos, all of the Blockel test, the Lagrel test, all of the guys who are in administration in the concentration camp as well. And he makes the comment, of course, they're all in perfect health. That's the trade they make. They help the Nazis by being in charge of the work situations, helping to administrate everything that happens at the camp. And of course, they're fed and their medical needs are seen to. So that's kind of a stark contrast there. And once again, that goes back to your human dignity. Okay? So you are choosing to help the Nazis in order to survive, which is an assault. You know, not saying that they shouldn't have done it, but it is, and it's an assault on their human dignity. So the few days pass, and those who had their numbers marked down are starting to feel, maybe it is going to be okay. The Blockel test said that. Maybe it is. Maybe they're not going to come for us. And then sure enough, they come. And numbers are read off from people who did not pass the selection. And a second selection is conducted. So think about that as a way of psychologically torturing the inmates as well. You just have to wait. It's not immediate. You just have to wait. Am I going to live? Am I going to die? Did they take my number? And Elie's dad is in that second group, and he survives the second selection somehow. But there's a very touching moment where Elie's dad is trying to tell him goodbye and give him his inheritance. That happens on page 75. And do you remember what the inheritance was? A knife and a spoon. He said, don't trade them, don't sell them, hang on to them. And Elie tries to tell his dad, it's going to be fine, Dad, you're going to make it. But he doesn't really believe it in his heart. So when he comes back from work that day and Elie's dad is there, Elie is extremely relieved and feels such a sense of happiness that he's still there. All right? So that relates to our human dignity. It's a way of hanging on to it in the love that we bear one another. Next big vignette that deals with that theme is the hospital situation. Elie has to go into the hospital, and there he meets a Hungarian Jew who has a really dim view of things. He says, Germany has no need of sick Jews. You need to get out of here as quick as you can. And he says the only thing he still has faith in is Hitler, because only Hitler has kept all of his promises to the Jews. And at this stage of the game, you see Elie not having any faith in humanity. He's like, well, maybe this Hungarian Jew is trying to get me out of the way. If I leave, then that means there's an extra bed and he won't get killed or put out. Elie doesn't trust the doctor. Doctor ends up being a really good guy, does the surgery on his foot, even makes it so that during the evacuation, Elie and his father can stay there. But he's suspicious. He's like, he doesn't want to go under because he's afraid he'll never come up. And then when he comes to, he's worried they've cut off his leg because the Hungarian Jew is getting into his brain. In a place that's set up to kill Jews, why in the world would they be operating on my foot trying to help me get better, right? Doesn't make any sense. So that whole thing relates to this theme right here. And we've talked about this before, this whole idea of the psychological torture of trying to plan, trying to come up with the best decision that you can make in certain circumstances, and having that totally always blow up in your face. And I know you know the decision that I'm alluding to here, the decision that Elie and his father make to stay, to whether to stay in the infirmary or whether to go. They're evacuating the camp. The Russians are there. And of course, the Russians don't want all of these inmates to be found. So they are evacuating the camp. They make the decision to stay, and they would have been rescued. They would have been rescued in 2 days by the Red Army, but they make the decision to march. Even though Elie's foot is not healed, and he's still, very weak. So all of that kind of wraps up together into that important theme of maintaining human dignity in the face of terrible treatment. There's a beautiful example of the Blockle test making everybody clean before they leave. They're getting ready to go on these marches, which are death marches. I know you've heard about those before. It's snowing, it's freezing cold. The Blockle test says, we're cleaning this place from top to bottom. And everyone says, why would we want to clean this place from top to bottom? And he says, so that when our liberators come, they'll know that men lived here and not animals. And that's very important to them. So they clean it spotless. And that happens on page 84, if you want to go back and look at it. So yeah, despite this inhuman treatment, there are lots of signs that the Jews are hanging on to their human dignity in the way that they treat each other, in the way they view themselves. But it's a struggle, and we see the struggle everywhere in these vignettes that we've been shown in this chapter. All right, last one I wanted to mention to you was the strength of family bonds. And all the examples that we've already given show that. It's so important to Elie to be there with his father. And he clings to those opportunities to stay together. And you get a sense that without the dad, Elie would be lost. And that without Elie, his dad would be lost. So the motifs of fire and night come back. We've got them traveling at night. And if you look at why that might be, they're still trying to keep a lot of this secret from the Americans and from the Red Army. So the traveling at night makes it so that from the air, from the towns, they're not these just armies of emaciated prisoners traveling the streets of Poland. So that's pretty important. And on page 83, he talks about there being so many last nights. The last night in the ghetto, the last night in their home, the last night in Buna. And how many last nights would there be? He talk about that too. So night keeps coming back. And he talks about his foot being on fire. And he also mentions that he himself, on page 69, when he's talking about his faith, he says, I was nothing but ashes. And if you remember before, chapter 4 and chapter 3, he's talking about he was only a stomach. And now he's reduced to only being ashes. So you see that fire consuming, as he mentioned in his never speech in chapter 3. You see that fire coming back again, back again, back again. All right, guys, go ahead and read chapter 6. I'll be putting a video together for that here in a little bit. I hope you're well. Hope you're not going crazy in this quarantine time. And I sure miss seeing you. I hope to see you soon.